I wanted to start sort of big picture. It's been a couple of weeks now since the consolidation plan was released to the public here in Austin. What has your, response been to the reaction you're seeing from families? Obviously, it's hard for a lot of people to take in.
Yeah, first and foremost, I am wanting to kind of reinforce, the fact that this is a draft plan, that it will refine, and that right now, as we committed to, we're in the process of hearing feedback from our community, making adjustments where we can, exploring different ideas, and also communicating to our families that there's a sense of urgency around this work, but it has been going on for quite some time. The work started back in February, March of last year. We always communicated that November would be the date that we would take the vote. And wanting to also communicate, and I've heard from the community that there is a lot of thoughtfulness in the plan. There are many things that are being addressed, all at the same time. It's getting to a place where we have aligned feeder patterns throughout Austin we haven't had that in 144 years. It's addressing transfer policies and the way that we manage transfers. It's tackling boundary changes and becoming more efficient, which includes consolidations. We have a budget crisis. It's also being mindful of the turnaround plans that we have to respond to by way of the agency, and lastly, putting programs in a position to be successful long term. Whether it's dual language, or Montessori, or otherwise. And there are lots of things that are in this plan that would not otherwise exist if we did any one of those things in isolation. And so I have been encouraged when I hear from the community that they understand how complex it is, and that something has to change. There hasn't been a lot of feedback in the community saying that we should just do nothing because of the pressures that we felt as an organization for the last many, many years. We're just at that point.
But we have seen protests and walks with full families outside the district building last week at the board meeting, saying this process is being rushed in the sense that there's only 5 to 6 weeks in between the release of the plan and the vote. So I wanted to ask you, what is your response to parents who are concerned about that, and the fact that there are 4 Q&A sessions, 3 of those are virtual, 1 in person, but it just isn't enough time to properly hear out the community?
Yeah, we are taking the time as best we can to listen to the community and make adjustments. Again, this is a draft plan. We've made that commitment, and it will be refined. The other thing that I have been clear about is this. We're at the point we said we would be at back in summertime, in the early fall semester, and delay is a very hard thing for me to get comfortable with, because there is a huge impact with not doing anything, right? And one of the things I tell people all the time is you have to give time for families to plan. You have to. Our system, as complex as it is, as large as it is already preparing for the 26-27 school year. That's the reality of it all. The enrollment process starts in November. So all of these changes have to be incorporated into our systems. And if we wait to the spring to make a decision, think about the disruption in the community and our families, whether it's pathway alignment or staffing, and that really introduces harm into our system, into our students' educational experience. So for me, it's really, really important that we keep to November. The time, it feels urgent, as maybe the word that I would use, than rushed, because it is urgent. There are opportunities in the school year to make decisions like this, and there are opportunities when we do not do it. Many years ago, we made changes in our system in April and May, and honestly, we barely began to recover from those changes. So in this administration, with me leading the organization, I'm never going to introduce a change in the spring semester. If that's the case, I know it's going to be harmful, and so I'm not willing to do that. So we want to keep to the original timeline, and I certainly want to acknowledge that there is a lot of pain, a lot of frustration in our community because of what we're talking about, and I'm extremely sorry that we have to go through this. That was never my intention. It's just where we are given all the stress in the public education system within the state of Texas, and that's the honest truth.
And to sort of go off of that, when you talk about it being urgent, I know at the beginning of the year the district was facing a $100 million budget deficit. 3 schools are on their 4th consecutive F rating from the TEA. How did things get to this point? Could you explain that to parents?
Yeah, I think, we also had a conversation earlier today about the compression that occurs when you have mass disruption within a system. So you think about where we were immediately after the pandemic. We had a huge loss in vacancy in teachers. We had very, very few. Culture and climate was very, very low. You had multiple superintendents in a very short period of time. Well, what do you think what happens at that point, right? Well, instructional practice has changed. The entire system has to turn over, and you quickly find yourself in the 23-24 school year. Funding did not increase, so the cost of education continued to go up. We made a commitment to fund our educators and give them the chance of being able to live in the city that they serve. So we made investments in salaries, we made investments in curriculum, and so the system has begun to move, but the reality of it all is that comes at an expense. That all costs resources. And so we've made tremendous progress. We're 88% staffed. A couple of years ago, we were at 72% staffed. Attrition between Title I and non-Title I schools was at one point over 20%, now it's less than 2%. Like, these are all indications of a healthy system getting healthier, and we see our outcomes beginning to move, right? We had 30 Fs in 2023, in 2025 you have 23, and next year we'll have very, very few. And all of this is kind of done in a way that protects our values. We didn't remove librarians. We kept to ensuring that we have nurses at every one of our campuses. We kept planning time at all of our campuses, right, for secondary. We could have saved almost $20 million, but it was important for us to keep that, right? We adopt our own curriculum. There's curriculum that we could acquire that is very inexpensive, and in fact, we'd get paid to use it. But I know for certain in this community, in Austin, that's not something that we would want for our students. But those things come at a cost. And so now we're at a point where if we agree to protect these things and we're going to move outcomes and do it our way, then we need to have the resources to be able to do so. And it can't just be in some parts of Austin, it has to be everywhere, which is why we're really kind of enforcing that we want to have strong neighborhood schools, but everywhere in Austin. And the reality is, right now, we do not have that. So that's the complexity, and that is what has built up to where we are. And it wasn't that long ago, it was 2.5 years, right? I mean, it's compounded quickly because of where we are and the kind of changes that we've seen in the system. And I want to be proactive and not be at a point where we have few options or where someone or an entity is doing or making changes for us. I want to make sure we keep that control in this community. That's incredibly important.
So what would happen in your view if this plan was not approved? Well,
a couple things. First and foremost is the turnaround plans, and there are many of them. There are 24 that are being approved as part of this plan. Those turnaround plans are required by the state agency on November 21st. This vote takes place on November 20th. And so, that vote has to occur. We will not be in a position not to be compliant with the Texas Education Agency. It's not going to happen. But I will say that the opportunities in how we support our schools is going to change. If we're going to allocate more resources, whether it's instructional coaches or additional teachers or reduce counselor to student ratio, that's going to cost between $700,000 to $800,000 a campus. Well, we're already running a budget deficit, so where are those funds going to come from, right? And so at the same time, I know that here in the near future, by way of legislation, that we're going to have to commit to having certified teachers in every one of our schools. You can no longer be an alternative certification plan. It's not going to be possible moving forward. And so what does that mean? Well, it means programs that don't have the student population to support their intended need, right? Emergent bilingual students being able to receive dual language programming. If it's not the right number of students to support the program, we're going to have to move educators to ensure that we keep licensed educators in the classrooms for those students. And that's going to create disruption. So I'm trying to get the system to be responsive and proactive so that we're not reactive. So if the vote doesn't take place, then you would not see the impacts the way that you see them now across this entire city. They would very likely be weighted to one side of the city, most likely the Eastern Crescent. And we have talked for a very long time about making sure that we acknowledge that we are one school system We have to acknowledge that what is happening in one part of Austin may seem very far away and removed, but it has an impact on our ability to support your student at your neighborhood school. So what I would say is we would introduce significant risk into our organization if a vote did not take place. We would not be able to address in the same way we are planning to the deficit budget moving forward, and it would keep us from getting to where we want to be, which is a vibrant school system that is producing high outcomes, but doing it in a way that aligns with our values. Like, that is the end game. That's where we want to be. That's who we are. And this is one of those steps in that journey.
Yeah. I want to talk about the development of the plan that was put out. So we saw the data rubric, we saw the contextual analysis that was put out. Can you give people sort of an insight to behind the scenes? Who is at the table to really build this plan and create that map that was put out?
Yeah, so I'm someone that wants to be able to share with everybody how we got to a final recommendation, right? And so very early on, we were clear that you have to start with data. And being in Austin ISD for as long as I have, I've gone through multiple large efforts, and I have found that whenever you don't have high quality data that can withstand any scrutiny, then you're going to put the plan at risk. And so it's really, really important for me to make sure that we collect the data, we had high quality data, we incorporated it into a rubric. The rubric was developed with feedback from principals. We did surveys. We had community meetings to understand, what elements of the rubric should be considered. What should be in the rubric? We had those meetings. They occurred in the spring semester. All of that got fed into the rubric. We produced the rubric, and the rubric identified where we had misalignments in our school system. And if you recall, at that time, there was a lot of energy around, well, is this a consolidation list? And we said over and over and over, it's not the consolidation list, not the consolidation list. We had high schools in there. We had schools that were over-enrolled, right? We had lots of different schools. And I was really clear, this is a list of schools where we have misalignments in our system. And then that was a starting point for our kind of deeper dive, where we looked at programming. We looked at areas of the schools, the city, and said, okay, these are the number of seats that we believe need to be addressed within a certain area. What do the facilities look like? What's the programming? How do we provide access to these families that need access, that might otherwise have it? And then let's build a solution, acknowledging that whatever you do at one school is going to impact another school. And then we kept to some fundamental goals, like having as few splits in our feeder patterns as possible was a goal of ours. In 144 years, we've never had that, ever. We have middle schools that go to 4 or 5 high schools. Like, how can you keep community together when you have those type of splits? And so it was iterative. We did have a steering committee. We had principal work group who helped inform the process. And ultimately, it was challenging at times because we would want to explore different ideas, but we also knew that, if we shared something too early, it'd be perceived as like a decision or a recommendation, and that was never the case. We really wanted to make sure we could defend every single change or every single element of the plan, knowing that it was going to be refined, right? No matter what we do, no plan was ever going to be perfect. But we wanted to make sure that we shared something with our community that could respond to, because if you don't have that, in absence of a plan to respond to, then it's just ideas that are very difficult to actually pin down and execute. And for me, it's really, really important that whatever we put out there, we're able to execute, implement. The worst thing that could happen is us to accept a plan, have the board approve it, and then me not be able to deliver. That's not who I am. That's not who this administration is. So that's how it came about. Obviously, I think when you look at it, it is a very detailed, thoughtful plan. I've studied these all across the country. I know the work that's been done. I know this space very well. And I'm very proud of the thoughtfulness and complexity of it, because it is a complex problem that we're trying to address. And it does touch every part of the city.
In the last decade, I know the district has lost 10,000 students. Next fall, the state will open up its school voucher program. So I wanted to ask you, does that come into play when you're looking towards the sustainability of this plan?
Well, it absolutely does. I mean, we have to acknowledge that, the environment that we're operating in, and you know, our privilege of providing public education to our students, you know, is occurring at a time when there are lots of other things occurring, right? Whether it's vouchers, there are changes at the federal level around immigration that have had a huge impact on enrollment. There are lots of things. We had Title I, we had Title II, Title III, and Title IV dollars get frozen for a period of time, right? Those dollars directly support student groups who have been historically underserved. And so to me, I genuinely feel as though the education in Austin ISD is strong and getting stronger every single day. But that requires stability, it requires alignment with our values, and leading into who we are as a city. And if we do that well, and we can actually afford to do it, then we can compete with any charter, we can compete with any private school. But am I aware of it? Do I acknowledge that that is a risk that we have to consider? Yeah, but it's also part of our projections. You know, we're not doing this in isolation, assuming that it's 2025 numbers. We're using the demographics that we have available to us with the demographer to look at you know, trends in future years, considering developments that are underway or to be planned, and then also making adjustments based on things like you said regarding vouchers. But I would also say that in many ways, you know, the complexity of the federal government and the role that immigration has in our school system is playing a big role now. I mean, every urban school district within the state of Texas is down from an enrollment perspective because there are not new families entering our communities, right? And that's another thing. People need to understand that we are having to do all of this with these pressures from everywhere. And we're doing it in a way that protects our values. And that's what this plan represents. It's hard, it's difficult, but if we as a city believe in public education, which I believe we do, we can be successful. It just means that each of us is going to have to make an adjustment in this new reality that we're just in.
How does the district convince parents, though, to stay in the district if they're in a school like Maplewood Elementary, which is an A-rated school, and then they look at the school they're moving to, which has a D rating? A lot of students may be moving from a higher-rated school to a lower-rated school under this plan. What do you say to parents who are concerned about that aspect of this consolidation?
Oh, yes. So this is one question I love to respond to. What I would say is our schools are so much more than just a single rating, just to be clear. And I have heard for the last 3 years how this community believes in our schools and how all of our students are much more than a single rating. I know my students are. They're not defined by a single score that they take on a single day, but it does help us understand where our students are in performance-wise within the state. And so I struggle whenever I have families compete schools against one another, because the reality is that there are incredible things happening at all of our schools, period. And there are some schools who were in years past had a lower rating and now they have a higher rating. Well, what do they think changed? One of the things that changed was that families who believed in the school, who probably had, in many cases, means to support the school in a different way, did so. And so what happens? All of a sudden the school begins to move. And my job is to make sure that we have strong schools and we have the resources deployed to ensure all of our students are growing academically, but also in a way that kind of honors who they are as a human, right? We want students who feel comfortable in their own skin. We want students who are going to be great humans, but also be able to perform on a test so that we understand where they are compared to the rest of the state. And so what I would say is, please do not distill down, you know, your student's future based on one letter grade that took place on 1 year at over a couple days. Because I've had this conversation, and I said, well, last year that school was a B, and this year they're a D. What happened? Well, I mean, 2 years ago it was an A, or or in 2023 we had schools that were B that all of a sudden were an F. Right? The system changed, and we are evolving, and we're going to be responsive to it. But it's the same students. So for me, it is really hard whenever we begin to, target schools like that, because my objective is to have high-performing schools everywhere in Austin, but do it our way, in a way that aligns with our values. And I bet that if they visited that school, they would see how loving it is, because there are schools that don't have high performance ratings, but they have lines and wait lists and people that love them, strong PTAs. So I just would caution our families to ever make a decision based on a single letter grade. It does share something about the system, sure, and we own that, and we're going to improve, and we are improving. Like I just gave you some numbers. We're improving we're responding very, very well. But do not let that be the barrier for you exploring a school. So I'll just say that.
And one last question before I turn it over to Azul. I wanted to ask about these turnaround plans, and I know that there are 7 schools that are listed for closure right now that are going to be under a turnaround plan. If those, forgive me if I don't understand the complexity, so this is partially why I'm asking.
There's a lot of moving pieces for sure.
Those schools that are closing, the majority of the students at those schools, wherever they go, that school will now be under a turnaround plan. Is that correct?
Yes. So the way that it works for the turnaround plans is the receiving school will receive the TAP. We call them TAPs. In some cases, it's 70% of the students. In some cases, it's 60%. In some cases, it's 90%. The receiving school, their rating will have, and their performance will play into the plan itself, because it ends up becoming one plan. But the school that's receiving the students, the majority of the students, is the school that will be assigned the turnaround plan. And it doesn't mean that their previous years of accountability gets wiped out. That's want to be really, really clear, because there are schools that are going to high-performing schools, defined by the accountability system. And the concern that I've heard is, well, now does all of a sudden this school become a C school when it was previously an A school? And no, your A ratings hold. It just means that we have to welcome our students. We have to put systems in place to support them to make sure they're academically successful as they move into the new school. And the theory there is that the educators and the professionals in the school and the principal's leadership have led to successful outcomes in the past. So let them continue. In other instances where it's a school that's maybe going from like a B to a C, or maybe it's a TAP that's going to a C, well, we need more supports there, right? The school maybe hasn't gotten to that level of performance, but it's on us. The system, we as a school district have not created a system that produces the outcomes, right? These outcomes are a reflection of the system, and so we're making those changes. We're doing it our way, in line with our values. But at the end of the day, we are confident that each of these TAPs will support our students, and we'll be able to break the chains, accountability chains, and move forward and be successful, because those are risks that we have to manage if we want to ensure local control, which I'm absolutely committed to doing.